When the world is devastated by atrocious acts like mass graves and child slavery, it is just sad to know that we know nothing about it. Moreover, we abhor the fact that there are government officials that are complicit within these atrocious acts. But we think there is hope because we have found potential information into avoiding these damages as a whole. With that being said, what is this debate about? This debate is about whether we should forego the closure closure of these individuals on a minor scale in comparison to the future victims and the future use of closure. That being said, our policy on two levels. Firstly, the amount of mitigation will be proportionate to the efficacy of the information, right? So if you think that if the information has potential benefit into avoiding that harm's whole or avoiding the ring of human trafficking whole in that area, then the will be proportionate to the mitigating how much we mitigate that crimes as a whole. So with that being said, my second level, we will investigate to make sure this information is true. We will take investigative measures to ensure legitimacy of this information, right? So we'll validate these types of information through investigation, right? So it's true information and it's considered as potential information. In my speech, I will answer three arguments made, right? Firstly, when do we mitigate? In what instances do we mitigate these types of sentences? Secondly, what's the necessity of this policy in minimizing human trafficking as a whole? And thirdly, how does this prevent further atrocities by government officials, right? So let's deal with the first argument. When do we mitigate the sentences of these criminals? In status quo, through the criminal justice system, mitigation usually happens through plea bargaining. What are the factors that determine this? That determine bargaining in the first place. Firstly, we think that there is the government recognizes that there is a social utility that is retributed towards society to prevent the future damages from happening in the first place, right? So any crime committed is basically a crime against society, right? So if we can validate that the information provided, for example, if the information provided by a drug mule prevents the atrocities committed by drug lords, we think that that is a social utility, right? So the conclusion of the first level is basically how we provide mitigating this if there is a social utility and we can protect society in the long run. Secondly, we provide mitigating sentences when we recognize that there is a sign of change. Since we already characterized you that there already validates this information and there is a potential in avoiding damage as a whole, we think that this also counts in as a factor for determining that mitigating factor as well, because the information is potential in avoiding damage, in avoiding child slavery or people from dying as a whole. So the conclusion at this level is that there is a sign of change within this there's a sign of change within the information, so we should allow it to be a mitigating factor. The third level under this, we think that this information will serve a higher purpose than the punishment, right? So recognizing that we already recognize the potential of that form of information, we think that it can go much further than the punishment as a whole, right? Sure, we can punish these individuals for committing committing human trafficking or killing individuals. But what we do is we fix the future in the long run, right? We get information and we don't necessarily have to carry out these punishments in the future because less crimes will be committed, right? Less human trafficking incidents happen in the future. So the conclusion to this level is that this information will serve a higher purpose than the punishment because it prevents future damage and it goes further in the punishment of retributing the criminal as a whole. Before I move on to my fourth reason,
why is it principally justified to try to trade off the closure of the victims when the result of this human trafficking is the result of state failure and state mistakes in general?
I will tell you why. We should do that in my third substantive on how I will characterize to you the government officials and why is it our responsibility to do so in the first place. But let's briefly my fourth reason to what's the incentive of a mitigating factor. If the information has a higher value than the crime itself, right? So we recognize the criminal, yes. If we obviously we recognize the criminal, right? But maybe there'll be more information or better information that the criminal can propose. The conclusion of this whole argument is that we think it is justified to allow these criminals to mitigate the sentence of these criminals if it fits the criteria of minimizing the harm of human trafficking as a whole. Opposition has to prove to us whether they would forsake productive information in preventing future damage, preventing children from being slaves, preventing children from dying. My second argument: what's the necessity of this policy in minimizing human trafficking? Firstly, on the first level, for any human trafficker, this will help any human trafficker who wants to leave the crime, right? Because we offer the opportunity, or we offer the incentive to go. We offer the incentive for these criminals to cooperate with the government, because the reason they can't cooperate in the government in the first place is because of fear and because there is no legal recourse because they're committing that illegal act, right? So I think there's a higher chance of cooperation when we rehabilitate these individuals and we give these individuals a chance for greater good as a whole. The second reason for necessity is that we reduce the efficacy of human trafficking as a whole. We think when we gain information that potentially could reduce the influence of human trafficking, we think that if there is one less human trafficker, there is 10 less human trafficking victims. So the conclusion of this argument is that we stop and we cater to, when we catch the individuals who are complicit within we cooperate with these individuals that are complicit in the act to preventing future damage. My third argument, very briefly, right? We prevent further atrocities of the government and state officials. Basically, these officials are complicit, and we prove that within status quo. So these border patrol officers we think that these border patrol officers are the last line against human traffickers. So the outcome of allowing this to happen is that we mitigate the complicity of these atrocious acts, right? So we mitigate this complicity and we mitigate atrocious acts from happening in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that this is the only way we can stop human trafficking, or we can minimize the harm, because we have to realize that we know nothing and we have to take a step into knowing something.
I'd like to thank Mr. Sean Manuel for his speech. And now to begin the case for side opposition, I'd like to invite the leader of the opposition. Here.
The sentence and the severity of a crime should reflect the harm done to community based on the act done. These individuals are in no way to be given a lesser punishment than they deserve. It is morally abhorrent to listen and to hear to their arguments when you will know that human will spend lesser years than he deserves in prison. We have to uphold the morality that we live in, and the only way we can do that is if we put these human traffickers receive the justice, not only receive the justice, but receive proportionate justice in this circumstance. Let's look at a few rebuttals before moving on into my two substantives. Number one, Sean told us that if the criteria to decide whether we will give mitigating factors to an individual, if we can somehow ascertain some form of signs of change, these individuals are sick people who kidnap children and put them into prostitution rings. I don't think they will somehow change, or I don't think they will somehow show signs of change. But the only thing that will change under their paradigm is everyone will admit that I know something. Everyone will admit that these border control officers are the reason why I human traffic into your country, not because I'm sick and I committed the crime and I had the intent to commit the crime. So most people that will get caught will say, yes, I know something, and the criminal mindset will fuel this and will make them say yes, and will make them seem like they have some form of information to give. At the end of the day, they just don't. Too many different opinions will make it harder for us to investigate, since we only can clarify whether the information is true or not if we investigate. So when there are increased number of investigations, this reduces the effectiveness of that investigation, and it's better off not having this policy, because we investigate ourselves and we have lesser differing opinions, and we will still investigate at the end of the day. Have a seat. Secondly, he told us that this information will serve a higher function than punishment. No, these individuals are, as I already told you, are individuals that won't change, because if they will change and they have some humanity in them, they wouldn't kidnap children away from their families. They wouldn't put them, make them child slaves. They wouldn't put them in prostitution rings instead. So they have to face justice, and the most importantly, they have to face proportionate justice. Have a seat. Necessity. Sean told us that this policy is necessary. Like, necessity doesn't justify everything. Like, we also need to get over terrorism. We also need to stop terrorists from doing the heinous crimes that they do. But we don't negotiate with terrorists, and all other countries are against the fact that we negotiate against terrorists. Maybe it might work, but that is maybe a necessity, but we don't do it because these are individuals that go against morality and our sanctity. Have a seat. The fourth and last rebuttal that I have is that try to propagate that this policy will work. And if this policy works, if there is one less human trafficker, there will be 10 less human trafficking victims. Let me tell you this: if there is that one less human trafficker has caused damage to hundreds of individuals who were victims of human trafficking, and not only that, to that person or her or he or she's family and relatives and friends that are also affected by this policy, they had to go through the humiliation and depression of that human trafficker and the crime that he has committed. So we cannot let this person go. What is the substantive that I will be talking about? I'm going to talk about why this is principally unjustified and why the court of law cannot allow for this to happen. Secondly, the silver practical outcomes that will happen, and this is bad for the state and for these individuals. Before that, Kishen.
When these individuals provide information, regardless of whether they have the willingness to change, it shows that they cannot go back to the horrible lifestyles, because people in these illegal forms will not accept them. If you accept them as trafficking 100,000 individuals, don't you prevent them from trafficking 100,000 more individuals?
So, Kishen, now if you steal a lollipop from 7-Eleven, and if I tell you I'll give you a Cadbury, if you tell me who that cashier was there, obviously you will, right? So like the kind of mindset is that you obviously want a mitigating factor and you will do anything possible. So you will tell what the race this particular border patrol officer is, you will tell me what is his age, you will tell me that is not important for the investigation. As long as you know some form of information, doesn't warrant you to get a mitigating factor in this circumstance. First reason as to why this is principally unjustified. This is a state failure. We recognize that the liability is on the state. The state cannot transfer the liability to the human traffickers and to these individuals who are not victims but perpetrators. Since the reason they gave to us is that this will help to solve human trafficking. Like the problem here is that the state lacks border security. There is ineffective border control. They cannot reduce the punishment because they fail to meet not these border control officers at the end of the day, because they are the ones that hired the border control officers. Second reason, this abuses the element of mitigating factors, because in vast majority of circumstances, when it comes to mitigating factors, it is because the criminal doesn't deserve that punishment. It is because that environment caused that individual to commit the crime. These individuals have the same intent as any other criminal out there and has the same act committed as any other individual out there. So he's equally guilty. He has committed the equal amount of severity to society, because we think that this individual wasn't poor. This individual didn't have any other way to commit this crime, but he chose this way. And the most important thing here is that this reduces the severity of other mitigating factor crime. So you now place him at the same pedestal as to a poor person robbing a store, as to a mentally ill individual that is committed a crime because of his crime. All these things reduce the effectiveness of the court of law, and we don't stand for it. The third reason is that we cannot forego closure. Many individuals achieve closure differently, but most of them obtain closure when you put the perpetrator behind the bars and in jail and in prison. This means that closure is unique and you cannot replace that closure, Kishen. Secondly, side government has to live in a world where they give up closure and in totality for information that may or may not be useful. We think that the trauma and depression that individuals go through is more important to us than these individuals who may give some fake information, and even if the information is real, it is not important. Secondly, the practical outcomes. What happens now is that we think that judges over-punish these individuals. How so? Because most judges and most people feel like they have a very close relationship when it comes to human trafficking, because we think it's the abhorrent act. What will they do now to overcome this mitigating factor? They will compensate that by giving a very high punishment and a very high sentence instead, regardless of what this individual did. So what happened now? They will still be, what happens now is that this is unfair in court of law, because we understand that these individuals are still humans and are still perpetrators. They need to be treated fairly in the court. What happens now is that you unfairly treat these individuals regardless of the crimes they commit, and we need to give them the same equality as you will give any other perpetrator, because these individuals are perpetrated our justice system, but we are not unfair to them because they were unfair to our society. We cannot be like them. We are more than proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank Mr. Nimalan for his speech, and now I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
The mitigation that side government offers is proportionate to the usefulness of the information that is given out by a human trafficker. This undermines a large portion of side opposition's responses, because a human trafficker cannot give information that is irrelevant to the investigation, or cannot give information that is counterproductive to narrowing down the scope of perpetrators and the scope of betrayers towards a nation. This also means that human traffickers cannot do anything counterproductive towards any forms of investigation, meaning that they have to betray the lives that they used to live, and they have to leave human trafficking as a whole. Because the moment they give information about corrupt officials, individuals within the ring of human trafficking will not accept them as one of their own. They will be seen as snitching. They will be seen as individuals who are giving information away and affecting the human trafficking process in its entirety. What does this mean? This means two things. One, it means we reduce the number of human traffickers in the world, which we think is the best form of closure we can provide to each and every member within society. But two, we ensure that individuals on the ground are safe, and we make it an option for individuals who are forced into human trafficking to exit the system, because they can't do it in status quo, Mr. Speaker. In status quo, they're interrogated. They are offered no opportunities to change. They are offered no opportunities to make the system better. Some people want to change and rehabilitate. We provide them that option. I'm going to ask two questions. One, why is the government directly complicit in the crime? Why is this the only method taken to prove their complicity and to take some form of change? But second, why is it important for human traffickers and the rehabilitation that we provide towards them within their corporation? But before that, three questions towards Nimalan's speech. One, will these individuals change? Because the contention that comes from him is that these are individuals who are sick. These are individuals who carry out the processes for the fun of it. Untrue. Everyone is motivated to commit a crime by specific factors. That means it is true that some human traffickers are poor. It is true that some human traffickers are forced to the situation because the affiliation that they have, maybe via the family members or the institutions they live in. And these are human traffickers who are unfairly victimized within the system, and these are individuals we need to give a second chance to. But even if individuals do not comply, they do not change, at the end of the day, if they give information, this shows that they cannot go back to the system, and this shows that these are individuals who have no opportunity but to do what's right. But also, they contended it. They said, you know what? It's impossible to prove the information as to its validity. Untrue. Even if this person is his trial is mitigated, the person will still be within the confined bars of jail. Meaning, if we know the information is untrue and the information is fake, we can still prolong his sentence anyways, even if it happens after the court process, Mr. Speaker. Then investigations don't have to be stacked and coagulated. They can happen over a long period of time to prove whether it's true or not. That doesn't mean investigations will be any better or any worse than it actually is. It only means that we can find out what's true and what's right. Second, is it justified to provide mitigating factors? Because he tried to tell you that these mitigating factors undermine the court of law and how courts function. Untrue. That means this side of the house is also against plea bargaining if we can prevent terrorism. This side of the house is also against plea bargaining if we can prevent drug laws from assassinating individuals on the ground who are trying to conform towards those who not. They are against what's morally right, Mr. Speaker. They are against providing retribution towards individuals on the ground. Because a crime is not a crime against a single person. A crime is a crime against society. And crime should be reflective of individuals on the ground. So we are willing to trade off your closure. If that means we can prevent future harms to individuals, we are willing to trade off your closure if that means more individuals can be protected. We see it's morally abhorrent for them to say otherwise. Why are they fine with more individuals being trafficked? Why are they fine with more individuals being victims of kidnapping? Because this human trafficker left jail back to his old habits and continued to traffic more individuals. So it's untrue. We don't only provide mitigating factors to situations. We provide mitigating factors to better situations. Even if a person chose that opportunity and chose that course of life. If it makes the situation better, we are fine with it. Lastly, he said that these are individuals, these investigations will not function. I've already proven to you that investigations can happen over a long period of time and do not have to be coagulated. So what I'm going to talk to you about. One, whether the government is complicit in the crime at hand and why should they take necessary measures, because otherwise it's negligent. So one, why is the government complicit in the crime? A, the government is complicit in the crime by the hiring and firing of officials who are incapable, hiring of individuals who are uncorrupt, and to put individuals such as this in these exclusive and important jobs. States directly cause this harm to happen. We agree with side opposition. It's the callousness of states to not process these individuals properly, and we think that they need to make up for it. We don't see how side opposition is fixing the complicity of states when they allow states to continue to be scot-free of the problems that they cause. How are states going to fix their complicity when they don't have the necessary information to fire that guy, when they don't have the necessary information to bring that person to justice and to prosecute him? How is your side not being negligent when states choose to turn a blind eye towards these officials and they choose to not further the investigations into these circumstances? Because states have the opportunity to fix their problems. They just will not, because even if it comes at the cost of minor retribution. Go.
So if the state is the one that has to recover money, why in that process are you killing the closure and the trauma and the repression that hundreds of other victims face? Yeah.
Because the comparison is that you produce closure that is necessary for hundreds and thousands of future victims within status quo. You require that void of closure because these human traffickers and the situations that they're in will multiply. And the conditions that human trafficking, the way that human trafficking operates will be much worse. So it's not a comparison of whether closure exists or not. It's about foregoing closure for a better system which favors individuals in the future. We do this in status quo. They are not allowed to choose the punishments of perpetrators, even if that means it affects the way they actualize closure. Because we recognize that if they do that, it affects the way we isolate rapists and it affects the way individuals on the ground is harmed. So closure is important, but closure is secondary to preventing these harms from happening in the future. But second, we think that governments have an ability to fix the problem from happening. With this information that they necessarily have, we can highlight and pinpoint individuals on the ground which are complicit and cause these harms to happen. The comparison under side opposition's paradigm is, and the trade-off at the end of the debate is, we might forego the closure of some, but it's at the safety of many, it's at the safety of more individuals being trafficked, more individuals being victimized. And we would make that trade-off any day.
I'd like to thank Kishen for his speech. Now I invite the deputy leader of opposition. Yeah.
It is morally abhorrent to side with side government, and here's why. It is principally and practically unjustified to transfer the liability of protecting victims as a result of your failure as a state to have better police officers, of your failure as a state to have better border patrol, and your failure as a state to prevent this crime from happening, and sacrificing the closure that individuals have that are supremely unique to that particular crime by putting that person behind bars. Side government any justification as to why closure is unimportant, and side government chose to ignore it and deprioritize it. Closure is unique and exclusive to one method only, but the method in which we can combat human trafficking is not absolute, and you can make it many different ways as possible. So this side of the house defends a world that punishes victims twice, because the first punishment existed when the state failed to prevent family member and loved ones missing, but again, failed to give them the necessary closure by putting the perpetrator of those family members behind bars. We don't think it's principally justified. Let's look at a few rebuttals before I move on to positive. Number one, let's look at the policy. First of all, the first question that we asked from Nimalan was, how do you then therefore decide the value of the information and therefore juxtapose it to proportionality of the mitigating sentence? Never answered. But secondly, they told us that the truth and the value of the truth will determine how much of a mitigating sentence that necessarily the person can necessarily get. That assumes that at a split second, you know how much valuable and that information is true to begin with, because some investigations take ridiculously large amount of time to find out whether the information is true in the first place. So I don't understand how they can adjudicate and tell you that the value of information is correct at this point in time, and if it takes a long period of time, what do they do with the perpetrator in that void where they are investigating the person? Do you then punish him? Do you then not? But the value of information is then indicated by the practicality of information and not the truth of the information in general. So the information may be true and information may be actual, real, correct facts, but if you never ever help the state, it therefore is unfair. So all your arguments about these individuals changing and doing for the better and trying to escape the system fall on your own flat, because you only punish individuals and you remove the sentences based on practicality and not truth, and whether these individuals actually want to change their own selves at this point in time. Yes?
The first 30 seconds of my speech was explaining why the information is proportional to the mitigation. That means if the information is true but not important, we won't give the person a mitigation. Even if it takes a long period of time, we can keep him in jail and prolong his sentence if he's allowed.
But your argument is that you want to put mitigating sentences and help these individuals because these individuals are changed and have become better individuals. How does that change if the value or truth of the individual thing is based on practicality and not whether or not the individual is true in nature? I don't understand how. Secondly, does this fit the criteria of bargaining? First of all, they told us that it was a social good and therefore it's beneficial to individuals. A crime against these individuals may be a crime against society, but the person that suffers the most as a result of human trafficking are victims who are not protected and will not be protected under this side of the house because that social good isn't delivered to these individuals. Second of all, they told us that these individuals can mitigate complicity. First, they were telling us how they mitigate the complicity of the state in failing to protect these individuals. But second of all, Kishen told us very conveniently that they want to give these individuals a chance to escape the system. I don't want to give them a chance to escape the system because they've harmed and hurt hundreds of thousands of individuals. I don't think they should have the ability to escape the system. They must face proportionate punishment for the actions that they have committed in this particular point in time. Next, he told us that they are being negligent if they don't do this. First of all, just because you have a positive outcome on that crime and the method in which you conduct and that outcome is still wrong, the action in of itself is still wrong. So at the end of the day, you may be able to save some individuals, but the method in which you go and get the outcome is wrong. We think that that in itself is negligence in essence. But if you're negligent, you're negating the victims and the individuals who never had the opportunity to get any protection whatsoever from the state. We think that principally unjustified. Sit down. Let's look at the two arguments that Nimalan talked about that was not responded to. First, Nimalan told you why this policy is principally unjustified, why it's principally against every style of moral that we have. So it may be practically correct for us to say that we can negotiate with terrorists and maybe come up with some beneficial fight against the war of terrorism, but we don't do that because the morals that we have and the principal proportionality of punishment that exists in status quo. Meaning they are also willing to negotiate with terrorists and they're also willing to go through all abhorrent and sacrifice all the morals that we already had in society in order to get some benefit that may or may not be true in essence. They forgot to tell us, and they also did not respond to the practical outcomes. Like judges tend to overpunish, and Kishen very conveniently left that unresponded. Judges who have very clear responsive and reactiveness towards human trafficking, and vast majority of us feel very sympathetic towards families of human traffickers, families of victims of human traffickers, is that these individuals and judges especially tend to punish to compensate with mitigating sentences that exist. Meaning they don't believe in the law, but they still have to carry out the law that exists at this point in time. We don't think that's fair, and you don't achieve your benefit at this point in time. Why positive method? Why court closure is untraceable and supremely important? For that, yeah.
Judges make decisions based on spectrums or also retrospectively based on court cases before. That means even if a judge wants to overpunish, he can't do it too far because it will be blatant and has hatred to a particular criminal. That means they won't express decision anymore.
Yeah, so the argument also concedes that judges overpunish. This is the extent to which they overpunish. But second of all, overpunishing in essence is unfair because we don't accord, even if these individuals have committed a crime, we still proportionally punish the individuals based on the crime that they committed. However, a little bit more, we still punish them extra. What's closer untradeable and why is supremely important? First of all, it's unjustified to wrong the victim twice. And we've told you this, that closure is irreplaceable, but the methods in which you can curb human trafficking is not exclusive to this one method as well. You can do many other things. You can can fix your police system, you can fix your patrol borders, but you cannot fix and replace the closure that these individuals have lost, which makes it so exclusive to the side of the house. And they tell us why it is all right to remove this exclusive valuable component when it comes to the victim. And they told us that, and never ignore the fact that these individuals have been failed by the state, meaning that these individuals have been failed by the state and they failed by the state twice. It may be a crime against society, but it's a crime against this person as well. You may know it's a crime, but the magnitude and the impact of that crime affects the victim the most compared to other individuals in status quo. That is the metric which we adjudicate when to accord punishments. If the victim is the one that lost a brother or a sister, we think that that victim should be prioritized over the rest of society, where closure is irreversible. But second of all, it is impossible to fight without it. Untrue, right? You can obviously, like Sean's unrealistic characterization that we know nothing about human trafficking is untrue. We have many other methods in which we can curb human trafficking. We can tighten security borders. We can work with other nations when it comes to human trafficking. We can work with governments where human trafficking is particularly rampant, for example, in Thailand. This side of the house negates any existing methods and assume that is the only way in which we can curb. So, like, they also told us that this information is necessarily useful. The information is useless when you have a crappy system. If you have a system that is horrible and working at this point in time, the information can be as valuable as you possibly can, but if the system has failed in the past and the police officers have failed in capturing human traffickers, it'll never be useful in any way to preventing human trafficking in essence. So at the very end of the day, there are many other ways you can curb human trafficking. You can have many other methods, work with many other people, work with many other parties and governments. But the very valuable closure that is irreplaceable and valuable to that particular victim, which will be sacrificed, is something that side opposition will never ever forgo at any day.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and like to invite the government with
The problem with absolute punishment is it limits our ability to delve deeper into the issue. When Border Patrol officers are complicit in human trafficking, the issue extends to a government liability. Therefore, in order to reduce the problem, we need to be wholesome in the way we address it, and in doing so, be flexible with our punishments, to open up the scope as to how we can accord these punishments and who we can protect. In my speech there will be two issues, and in this issues, various questions to answer. The first issue, is the state acting in the wrong and enforcing this policy? The first question, what is the composition of the state? We recognize that there were some state failures when it comes to these Border Patrol officers being liable. Therefore, it's a shared liability between both Border Patrol officer and human trafficker. The crime is between both individuals. So we take responsibility of what happened. We take responsibility of what happened by punishing both people. However, in your side, we lack the information to punish Border Patrol officers who are as accountable for the crimes against your victims as a human trafficker. So you don't provide full closure, you only provide partial closure. Because this man may have brought your daughter to Vietnam, but this other guy let the guy through. So your closure is limited. But the state now can also engage or be more involved in the process because we have information directly from human traffickers. We also reduce the amount of human traffickers that are still in the system committing more crimes against humanity, as you so plainly painted it. But even if they're wrong, even if the state is completely wrong in doing this, we still think that the state prevents more atrocities from happening by acting in this manner. The comparative state negligent and ineffective, or we correct failures, that's reducing the problem shared by everyone. No, thank you. The second question, will states fail to provide closure? Because the line taken by team opposition is so absolutist. The line taken is, we offer protection to all victims. Well, what do you think we do? You don't offer protection to future victims. You don't see now. But if you continue to allow Border Patrol officers being negligent, if you continue to allow them to act, then they have the authority over letting your individuals continue moving or transporting more people. Therefore, you're only choosing to focus on the victims that are convenient towards your case, which isn't fair. But when a human trafficker is caught, you understand that the operation he carries out also stops as well. So all of the people and the victims he has, all the lives that he's hurt, we take those, we give them justice because we catch this guy. We're not going to give him full amnesty. No, thank you. But the argument that these people can never contribute, the argument that these people are just
bad people. It's an argument against any form of rehabilitation as a whole. By that logic, never let anyone out of jail. Never even have trials, because murder is a murder. So what? And if we bring him to the court, he's going to get overpunished or not punished enough. Your arguments don't make sense because they can still happen in your side, regardless of whether human traffickers are the issue. But the reason why closure still won't really be that effective, because your crimes have already happened. Your victims were victims, right? Therefore, this individual giving us information serves a higher purpose outside of the prisons than simply staying in the prison and not doing anything. He has valuable information that we could use, but because you don't want to utilize that opportunity, you create more victims. You create more people who become victims because you just thought it's easier for him to stay in jail. You just thought more people find it comfortable. States who cause a situation are guilty, therefore we will change them. But the final question on this issue, on what's the efficacy of this policy? I'll take any of you after my first issue. What's the efficacy of this policy? On information, they said our information isn't useful. They said our information lets them go free. But in the period of investigating the legitimacy of this information, we will keep them detained. We will have investigative measures. We will make sure that the information we receive is proportional to the mitigation that we give towards them. Therefore, we're not acting lightheartedly in the situation. We take it very seriously. But they're the ones strawmanning our case by saying that we're only going to find the practical form of information. We don't see practicality being exclusive from the truth. The truth and practical information that can give us benefits both exist, but your side won't receive any information. That's a comparative. We get information on our side that could reflect the entire scenario compared to you who only choose to hinge upon the narrow parts of this argument. But no, thank you. Also, we think the efficacy of this policy allows us to improve upon our failures. We make our people more accountable because they can't simply keep cooperating with more people when they know that there's a shared responsibility. And we also harm the chain of human trafficking by taking more people into our country and into the legal system. Before I move into my second issue, yes.
So all the benefits are predicated upon the fact that this information is useful. One of three of your speakers told us that one of the systematic changes that will happen in this policy after you get the information. The system is the problem, not the people.
Okay, so if the information isn't useful and he tells us whatever nonsense comes to mind, we won't even give him a mitigating factor. The information has to be proportional. How many times he needs to repeat? And your structural problems that you continue repeating. Over punishment, the fact that these people can get away with it. That's a problem of bad regulation. That's a problem of bad courts. That's not a problem against the principle that we need more information to stop the problem from going on. The second issue on is this method wrong? Two questions. One, are we taking the moral way? First thing, goodbye moral values. Because if we can get more people in our side, I don't care if I'm being the biggest dick in the world. I only want to end the war. I want to end the war by getting more victims, by stopping more people from becoming victims. I want to end the war by getting more people safely back to their houses. Therefore, we think if your moral values become an obstruction towards peace, then that's not a moral value, that's you acting in your own interest. But even if we aren't being moral, morals are extremely subjective. Therefore, they change the situation. If it's more moral to take information at the expense of one guy rotting in jail, then we think that's a moral alternative compared to your side. And on is this method wrong? The second, are we going to be abusing the courts due to over-punishing? There's something called a minimum mandatory sentencing. There's something called regulation of courts. There's something called an observation of the court process. So we don't understand how the minute this law is enacted, courts are going to go to hell. Courts are going to not be able to function anymore. We can't judge situations and cases because it's a human trafficker. We can if we caught them. We can if we caught them. That's a distinction. Now, when we have information, we can catch both parties and trial them in a fair court. Trial them in a court at least without them being able to roam freely however the hell they want. But the final issue, will we manage to end human trafficking? Of course, there are alternatives. Alternatives are not exclusive to our solution. You prolong the situation by only relying on status quo. Sure, you can keep going out there and hoping to find information one fine day, but one fine day is many more days away. We manage to end it now by getting more information quicker, by assessing accountability, by improving our flaws.
I like the now like it was the opposite. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, we think this debate isn't about whether or not their side achieves minimal amounts of human traffickers at the end of the day, because they still can't achieve that under their side, because they still want to mitigate their sentences at the end of the day. This debate is about whether or not the government is willing to trade off their humanity, morality, and common sense by mitigating the sentences of criminals who kidnap one of your family members in return for information of corrupt practices of border patrols. My whip speech is going to be very simple. I'm going to do a few things. Firstly, I'm going to engage on one major issue which I thought was really important in this debate. On is it really the responsibility of the state to do this? Because I'll ask a few questions on this issue. To what extent is the state going to take to obtain this information? But before that, a few rebuttals that didn't really fit into the flashpoints. First issue rebuttal. Kishen said that we said that human traffickers are people under social circumstances and also under the state's failure. No, being poor doesn't mean that you have to be a human trafficker. How does being poor equate to you being a human trafficker? Being poor doesn't make you want to kidnap children, doesn't make you want to put them into prostitution. If you're poor and you steal food from a mini mart, for example, that's fine by the court of law because that's under a crime of necessity because you would want to do that because you are a victim of the state's failure. But human traffickers are a different side of the story. That's a mitigating factor, not you being a human trafficker. No, thank you. Secondly, Sid said that their side is the best method of preventing human trafficking in the future. First of all, let's predicate it upon the assumption that the info that they obtain can be verified very fast. It cannot. Sometimes it takes even years to detect if he is lying or not at the end of the day. Secondly, even if this information that you obtain from human traffickers is useful, you have a bad system. The proof to this is that the amount of human traffickers that are still wandering around the borders of Malaysia at the end of the day. So the system that you propagate at the end of the day is also a faulty one because at the end of the day there's still lots and lots of human traffickers wandering around on the streets. Let's go on to my flashbacks, but before that, sure.
We agree that the system is faulty, but to correct the system, we need the information necessary to hire the individuals who are causing these crimes. Hereby, if we get information from human traffickers, we can fix the system. If you agree the system is faulty, how does your side fix it?
I'll answer that quite briefly into my major issues. So I'll move on to really quickly responsibility of the state. They had a chance to prove to us whether or not the state was responsible in obtaining this type of information and whether or not it is legitimate or not. I'll ask a few questions on this issue. Firstly, to what extent is the state going to take to obtain information under their side? Under their model, we still can't guarantee if their information is feasible or even credible in the circumstance. The PM only told us under his model that they will carry out investigations to find out if that information is true or false. But regarding how many investigations you will take is a legitimate proof that your system is already faulty in the sense where you are pushing that much investigations to determine if whether or not your information is true or false. And even if you receive information from a human trafficker, you don't know what to do. They haven't told us from the get-go what they are going to do with that information. Nimalan already POI'd that they didn't really prove to us the systematic changes that they're gonna propagate towards border patrols at the end of the day once they receive the information. They never told us the systematic changes they will make to border patrols. They never told us the key benefit on their side and what they now are gonna do to change or to establish newer or better border patrols. There are a lot of ways to obtain information, but we don't do anything because we are against this type of information. For example, we don't get information from a child because we recognize that we cannot forgo morality or common sense in order for us to obtain that information. Before that, yeah.
Given that your argument blankly assume all mitigating factors provide no closure or information, would you then never use mitigating factors in any circumstances?
Can you repeat that?
Given that your argument blankly assumes that all mitigating factors provide no closure or information, would you then never use any mitigating factors in any circumstances?
No, but because under this circumstance, when you're receiving when you're receiving information from a human trafficker, you wouldn't know this information is either feasible or credible in a sense where you wouldn't know if it was true in the first place. But because when they give you that false information, you wouldn't want to give him a mitigating factor because he already is a criminal in the first place, and you wouldn't want to give a criminal a mitigating factor. He's the one who's been the kingpin of the crimes in the first place. Now, we brought you a few things from the get-go. We told you why it is already principally unjust to give mitigating factor to criminals who under the court of law are criminals who subject your family members or even children to prostitution. We already have proven to you how it isn't at all legitimate to give them that mitigating factor at the end of the day. So the responsibility of the state does not extend to you obtaining information from that human trafficker, but instead we have to slow back from the get-go. We have to understand the morality and the common sense that we are willing to risk in order to obtain that information at the end of the day. Second question: Is deterrence actually going to happen on their side or on ours? And which side better promotes the type of deterrence for human traffickers not committing their crime ever again? Because these people are human traffickers, people who have committed their crime from the very beginning. They are, just because you give them a mitigating sentence, it doesn't mean that they will not be doing it again. You can definitely guarantee that once they get out of jail, they would be doing it again because they are already sickos. They are already people who are not in the right state of mind. So from the very get-go, we see that mitigating factor isn't really that legitimate to obtaining information that you have not really proven to us what benefit does it actually make. This debate isn't about whether or not their side achieves minimal amounts of human trafficking at the end of the day, because they still can't achieve that under their side because their policy still propagates mitigating factors or mitigating their sentences once they catch that human trafficker. It's about whether or not the government is going to make the trade-off of their humanity and morality for this information. They clearly weren't telling us from the start.
I'd like to thank Upward and now invite Up Reply. Here.
We can do a lot of things. We get a lot of information. We can become much smarter individuals. But the reason as to why we don't do these things is because we value our morals and value our human dignity. This side of the house is willing to forego one of the core tenets of human dignity, the human morals that we have in status quo, where we prioritize victims of the state and victims of state failure, where the state has failed in protecting them and the state has failed in punishing the perpetrator that is responsible for the death of a loved one. This side of the house is preposterous, and we abhor the actions. When it comes to treating these individuals differently, we will not treat these individuals any different than we treat any other criminal out there. Let's look at the two issues that came from this side of the house and how we tackle those issues. Number one, let's look at the policy and see whether it's feasible. First of all, we question to them how do you measure this value and how you ascertain how this value is associated. Never really telling us how, because the method in which you measure that value is associated with practicality. Your argument about individuals changing doesn't really change, because the moment they tell the truth, that is a sign that these individuals change. Your argument falls on itself. But the fact is, you can't have an objective scale to tell you how much of how valuable the information is, and juxtapose that to how many years of sentencing I reduce from the particular sentencing. Never really telling us how. But second of all, they told us that these individuals do this because they are changing and they're becoming better individuals. That is blatantly untrue. They are doing this because they're already in a trap hole and they want to get as little sentences as much as possible. And that's the reason as to why they do. These individuals don't just simply overnight or simply repent the moment you say, I think it's better if you don't become a trafficker, because these are sickos who have harmed thousands and thousands of individuals. Secondly, they told us, and let's look at the practical outcomes of their policy, whether or not they actually achieve the goals that they set out to achieve. First of all, with the information that they necessarily have, we question them how they would use the information to the best benefit if the system, in essence, is flawed. Because if you have a flawed system and funnel it with information and funnel it with a bunch of valuable things, you necessarily never ever benefit anything from that. But the second thing that we told you was that the method in which you can ascertain how valuable is information or the validity of this information takes a very long time to happen. And I told you that in my speech, Nimalan told you that in his speech, Mecja told that speech. Never really respond to argumentation. You can't just overnight tell me that that information is true and the other information is false, and that's when we mitigate the sentence of human trafficker A and human trafficker B. It is unfeasible and untrue. And we also question what they will do to the individuals at the point in which we decide whether or not the information is valid, never telling us what they will actually do. What did we tell you and why were they left unresponded? First of all, we told you that this policy is principally unjustified for a number of reasons. First of all, we told you that it's a state failure and the states have to make up for the mistakes instead of transferring liability upon individuals who they have done wrong. We think it's unjustified for you to transfer the liability upon individuals who have already been devastated, lost their family member, gone through psychological trauma because their mother or father, their brother or sister was kidnapped as a result of human trafficking. We didn't think that that's unfair. Secondly, we talked about practical outcomes and how judges necessarily overpunish in the first place. They told us that these individuals won't because it's observing in court. But we told you already that these things are subjective in the minds of judges. So you can't necessarily ascertain. Similarly to insidious discrimination where you can't punish them for hate crimes is because it's hard to ascertain how subjective the nature of it is. So overpunishing will happen right in front of your face, but you can't do anything about it. What about mitigating sentences in general? If the mitigating sentence revokes the ability for individuals to obtain the necessary closure exclusive to that person, we will not support that as well. But the third thing, and we told you this principle justified because closure is unique, closure is irreplaceable, and closure is valuable because you can do many other things to combat human trafficking, but you can't do many other things to replace the closure that has been lost from side of opposition. First of all, they told us, hey, screw morals, right? Because morals are necessarily harmful. What did Mecja tell you to this? If we screw our morals, we screw our very purpose. Because we have morals, we verify our identity and give us purpose of life. Because that side of the house then will be also willing to send in child soldiers because it's practically beneficial to send in child soldiers. They'll also be willing to force old people who have already retired to work because it's beneficial to the economy and it's more productive to do so. We have morals for a reason. We have morals because we are human beings in essence. So if they want to screw it, we will have no purpose. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker and members of the floor, we can do a lot of things. They become much more progressive, become much more smarter, but we don't do it because of our morals. If we screw our morals, I'm ashamed to call myself a human being.
So next time, the off reply. And now to end the debate as well, I'd like to invite the double reply. Yeah.
It is true that we're willing to forsake closure on a minor scale to prevent future victims. It is true that we're principally consistent and we would agree to negotiating with terrorists if that means we can prevent reverse incidences of bombings on large scales. It is true that these are individuals who have committed mass damage within their crimes, but so has every other perpetrator behind bars. Every individual deserves a second chance at proving their worth and becoming a contributive member of society. But if all else fails, recognize that when this individual gives the information that is necessary, he cannot go back to the lifestyle that he chose because people there will not accept him. Just recognize that when this individual gives that information, regardless of how short his jail term is, he cannot commit the same atrocities that he once did, and we can prevent future victims from existing. So I'm going to ask 3 questions. 1, is the state complicit in this crime? 2, which side better gives wholesome forms of closure? And 3, a minor issue and whether this the validity of this information and whether that is important. So 1, is the state complicit? We both agree that the state is the direct factor towards causing this crime happening. The only difference is side government provided a solution as to fixing the state system in status quo. Side opposition will increase and better your police forces. How are we going to increase and better our police forces where we don't have the ability to pinpoint which police officer is corrupt, when we don't have the ability to pinpoint which police officer led the human traffickers into our nation? Their alternatives are contingent upon the information that exists. The truth is, side opposition does not have the information. Hereby, they don't have alternatives to countering human trafficking. This is the best alternative that exists in status quo. So we both agree that the state is complicit. Why not take the extra step in fixing the system? Why not prove absence of negligence and prove that the state has an ability to create change? Secondly, let's look at closure. Side opposition argue closure is important and unique to every individual. We will not deny it. Closure is undeniable to every individual. But the scales on which closure happen under their paradigm are large. You require more individuals who require closure because there are mass scales of human trafficking because we could not catch that corrupt officer. The information was not.
There will be larger needs and grievances of victims in families because the corrupt officer could not be brought to justice and human trafficking happened on a larger scale. So true, we will forsake one or two individuals and the closure that they have. But that means we can prevent grievances in the future. We can prevent more individuals from being caught as a result of human trafficking, and we can prevent individuals from being, we can prevent more counts of human trafficking. So the conclusion to this issue of closure is simple. We can do many other things to ascertain, we can do many other things to try to combat human trafficking. But the alternatives that side opposition proved to us is contingent upon the ability to pinpoint corrupt officers. And that is extremely hard, but if not, takes a long time. Meaning human trafficking happens in mass scales under their paradigm because they did not take the alternatives of pinpointing who was at fault and who was wrong and preventing more individuals from suffering. But lastly, let's look at the validity of information. This should not be an issue. Because one, we've proven to that it's proportional to the usefulness of the information. Sure, we don't have an objective scale to determine what's right and what's wrong. But in status quo, plea bargainings operate on subjectiveness. So the government thinks that information is important. In status quo, they already grant you that form of mitigation. We can prove the validity and detain these individuals to make sure it's right. At the end of the debate, remember this. One less trafficker means one less corrupt border patrol officers. That means hundreds of individuals that can't be trafficked anymore because that route is not available. Side opposition is fine with these individuals being captured, kept in horrible situations, as long as it pleases the hearts and minds of individuals in status quo. That is shameful.